Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a really rich stack of sources. We've got science, current affairs, ancient history, even art. Our mission, as always, is to distill the key insights, the surprising facts, to help you get well-informed quickly.
Yeah, it's a great mix today. It really gives us a chance to connect some, seemingly disparate areas, find different perspectives, maybe some aha
Now,
moments.
let's jump right in. First up is the science section, with a truly significant study.
Yep.
It's titled India's Genetic Tapestry, Ancestry, Diversity, and Disease Risk. Now, this was a massive project. Researchers sequenced genomes of 2,762 Indians from 23 states and union territories.
Wow, that's extensive.
It is. They've created the most comprehensive genomic map of India so far. It covers variations across caste, tribe, language, geography, even rural versus urban settings. So what did this huge effort tell us about India's origins?
Well, the big takeaway is that it reaffirmed three primary sources of Indian ancestry, and it confirmed present-day Indians mainly come from a single out-of-Africa migration maybe around 50,000 years ago.
Okay, single migration and the three sources.
Right. So the ancestry is modeled as a blend. First, you have the ancient ancestral South Indians, indigenous hunter-gatherers. Then Iranian-related Neolithic farmers linked to folks from Sarazm in Tajikistan around the 4th millennium BCE.
Right.
And third, Eurasian steppe pastoralists who came in around 2000 BCE, and they're linked to the spread of Indo-European languages.
Interesting. Any other ancestral groups?
Yes, they also found East Asian-related ancestry, mostly in East and Northeast India, but also parts of Central India. It gets up to about 5% in West Bengal, and they think that likely entered around 520 CE. So quite a complex picture.
It really is. Beyond just ancestry, though, what about the health implications? Disease risk within this diverse population.
Yeah, that's a really critical insight here. India's population structure, especially long-standing practices of marrying within communities, endogamy, has created strong founder effects.
Founder effects, right.
Which basically means Indians, particularly in the South, have much more homozygosity that's having two identical copies of a gene than, say, Europeans or East Asians. Sometimes 2 to 9 times more.
2 to 9 times.
Yeah, and this dramatically increases the chances of inheriting recessive disorders, those conditions that only show up if you get 2 faulty gene copies.
Okay.
I mean, to give you an idea, every single person in this study had at least one genetic relative. It just shows a level of relatedness that's, well, quite different from other global populations.
There's specific examples?
They found one, yeah. A pathogenic BCHE variant. It's a specific genetic change linked to severe reactions to anesthetics during surgery. And it was found to be really concentrated in Telangana. And stepping back a bit, like all non-Africans, Indians carry traces of, ancient interbreeding with other hominins, Neanderthals, Denisovans.
Right, the ancient DNA.
Exactly. It can be up to 1.5% of the genome in some people. And what's fascinating is India has the widest variety of Neanderthal segments found anywhere.
Really? The widest variety?
Yeah. And these segments often pop up in immune system genes. Like there's a region on chromosome 3 linked to severe COVID-19, or Denisovan variants in MHC genes, which are crucial for fighting infections.
So they might have been beneficial.
The thinking is yes. They probably provided an adaptive advantage against unfamiliar bugs as humans moved into new environments.
Now, beyond these known segments, the researchers found something just huge. 2.6 crore, that's 26 million undocumented genetic variants.
26 million.
Yeah. And out of those, over 160,000 were protein-altering variants, completely new to global databases. About 7% were linked to diseases like thalassemia, congenital deafness, cystic fibrosis. I mean, this discovery raises a huge question, doesn't it? What does this data gap mean globally?
It absolutely does. And the implications are profound. Dr. Kurdenkoff, the study's first author, points out that this massive data gap for India, we're talking 1/6 of the world's population, isn't just, a scientific blind spot.
Right.
It directly impacts scientific discovery itself. It reduces the accuracy of disease risk predictions. And ultimately, it limits the promise of precision medicine for literally hundreds of millions of people who are underrepresented in these databases. It could create a sort of 2-tiered future for healthcare.
That's a serious concern. So what's being done?
Well, the team is already working to expand the study. They want to include more genetically isolated communities, and they're developing tools to better trace these disease-linked genes. But the core message is really clear. For medicine to be truly inclusive globally, India's vast genetic diversity has to be central to research, and that needs to be matched by deeper community-level efforts within India, too.
Powerful call to action. Okay, from the genetic blueprint, let's shift focus now to, well, societal structures, specifically women's representation in politics. Our next deep dive is from the FAQ section, looking at India's rank in the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Index for 2025. India actually dropped 2 places, down to 131st out of 148 countries.
Landed 31st.
Yeah. And while the gap narrowed a bit, or stayed stable in economics, education, and health, it actually got worse in political empowerment. What do the numbers show there?
Your numbers are pretty stark, unfortunately. The percentage of women in parliament dropped from 14.7% in 2024, that was 78 MPs, down to 13.79%, or 74 MPs in 2025.
A noticeable drop.
And women in ministerial positions also fell, from 6.45% to just 5.56%. It highlights this really strange paradox. Women in India are voting in record numbers, actually outnumbering men in the last 2 general elections.
Right, voter turnout is high.
Exactly. But their representation in the highest levels of power remains stubbornly low. It shows this fundamental disconnect between just participating in elections and actually sharing power equitably.
Now, some listeners might be thinking about the Women's Reservation Bill. The 33% quota for women in the Lok Sabha and state legislatures passed in 2023. Why isn't that making a difference yet? And what's stopping more women getting nominated in the first place?
Well, the catch with that legislation is that its implementation is tied to a new census and the subsequent delimitation exercise redrawing constituency boundaries.
Ah, okay, so it's delayed.
It's delayed. It means it can only actually come into effect from the 2029 general election at the very earliest.
Okay.
And another point is it's only valid for 15 years. So there are questions about how sustainable any gains might be after that.
15 years. And the candidate issue.
Political parties often fall back on this argument of lack of winnability for women candidates. Sometimes they even field women in seats already reserved for scheduled castes or tribes, sort of, ticking a box but not really expanding opportunity.
But is that winnability argument actually true?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? Tara Krishnaswamy from Political Shakti, that's a nonpartisan group, she strongly counters this. She points out that women candidates have actually had a higher winning percentage compared to men in every general election since 1952.
Every single one.
That's what she argues, yes. She says the real problem isn't winnability, it's that women just don't get onto the candidate lists of the major recognized parties. They average only about 8 or 9% of candidates overall.
So the bottleneck is party nomination.
That seems to be the core issue she's highlighting. And she adds another interesting point. Women voters don't necessarily vote for women just because they're women. They look for programmatic delivery. What can the candidate actually achieve for them?
Right. Performance matters.
It does. So it really highlights this major challenge. How do you translate that high voter engagement among women into real political representation? And there seems to be a lack of a clear pathway, a pipeline, from the grassroots level where there is significant reservation, 33–50% in panchayats and municipalities, up to state and national politics.
A complex problem with no easy fixes. Okay, shifting gears again. Dramatically, really. We turn to a critical and often volatile topic, India's borders and migration.
Right.
This next deep dive, also from the FAQ section, is titled India's Pushbacks and Deportations. It looks at a legal and border crisis, particularly in states like West Bengal and Assam. There was a recent incident where West Bengal residents suspected of being Bangladeshis were pushed across the border by the BSF, but then brought back after the state government intervened. So what's the key difference between deportation and pushback? Why does that distinction matter so much here?
It's a crucial distinction, legally and practically. Deportation is supposed to be a formal legal process. It involves detention, court proceedings, confirming identity with the other country.
Okay, the official route.
Right. Pushbacks, on the other hand, are not a legal procedure. They happen right at the international border, often based on the discretion of the border personnel, usually without any formal due process.
So, much more informal, potentially arbitrary.
Exactly. And this drive for pushbacks really seemed to gain momentum after the regime change in Bangladesh in August 2024. That was followed by the Pahalgam terror attack in April and something called Operation Sindoor.
Right.
Reports suggest around 2,500 suspected Bangladeshis have been pushed back so far. And you have figures like Assam Chief Minister Himanta Biswa Sarma publicly supporting the pushback mechanism over the slower legal route. Home Minister Amit Shah has also called for making an example of infiltrators detect, detain, deport, even if neighboring countries won't accept them back.
So what actual laws govern these actions? Is it all just discretion?
Well, until April this year, we were still relying on some quite old laws, actually dating back to the World Wars. But Parliament just enacted the Immigration and Foreigners Act 2025, repealing those older ones.
Okay, a new act.
Yes. And then there's also the Immigrants Expulsion from Assam Act from 1950. The Assam government is looking to enforce that more strongly now. It gives district commissioners power to declare individuals illegal immigrants.
How does this fit into the wider picture of India's borders? They're not all the same, are they?
No, not at all. Rules vary hugely. With Nepal, for instance, there's a free border agreement. And with Myanmar, there used to be a free movement regime allowing travel within 10 kilometers of the border.
Used to be.
Right. After the violence in Manipur in 2023, the central government decided to fence the entire 1,643-kilometer Myanmar border, which of course raises big questions about refugees.
Like the Chin refugees.
Exactly. Over 40,000 Chin ethnic group refugees crossed into Mizoram from Myanmar after the 2021 military coup there. Now, the Ministry of Home Affairs sent a letter in March 2021 saying states don't have the power to grant official refugee status because India isn't a signatory to the UN Refugee Convention.
Right.
But these refugees are still living there. And this recent pushback drive seems to have intensified after that April 22 terror attack. There are reports, though the BSF hasn't confirmed them, of undocumented migrants being transported, sometimes by train or even plane, to border areas specifically for pushbacks.
Mhm.
And the UIDAI, the authority handling the Aadhaar ID cards, was apparently asked to maintain a negative list to stop undocumented migrants getting identity documents. So it's a really complex, fast-moving situation with huge human consequences. It really throws that tension between national security concerns and, well, basic humanitarian issues into sharp relief.
Absolutely. Okay, let's pivot now to international law and current geopolitical tensions.
Right.
Our next deep dive unpacks the legality of recent U.S. strikes on Iran, following military actions by both sides around June 22nd. What are the key principles of self-defense under international law here? How does this all work?
Okay, the core issue really revolves around the lawful use of self-defense in international law. The UN Charter, Article 2.4, generally prohibits using force.
Right. The baseline is no force.
Exactly. Except in very narrow circumstances, like self-defense under Article 51 or if the UN Security Council authorizes it. Now, even within Article 51, there are debates. There's a restrictive view. Self-defense is only okay if an armed attack is actually underway. Then there's a more permissive view, which allows for anticipatory self-defense if an armed attack is imminent.
Imminent. That sounds like a key word.
It is, and the standard often cited comes from the old Caroline case. It requires the necessity for force to be instant, overwhelming, leaving no choice of means and no moment for deliberation. But many countries feel that's just too strict for modern threats.
That's rigid.
Yeah. And that's led to this really controversial idea of preemptive self-defense. This is where a state uses force not just against an imminent threat, but maybe during a sort of last window of opportunity to neutralize a threat from an adversary who has both the intent and the capability to strike later.
Right, the justification the U.S. used for the 2003 Iraq invasion.
Exactly. But as Prabhash Ranjan, a law professor, points out, this idea of preemptive self-defense doesn't really have enough state practice or acceptance, what lawyers call opinio juris, to be considered customary international law, and it's obviously highly open to misuse.
So applying that to the recent U.S. strikes on Iran, did Iran pose an imminent threat? And did the U.S. make its case legally?
Well, crucially, the U.S. hasn't submitted an Article 51 notification to the UN Security Council about these strikes. That's a key step you'd expect if formally claiming self-defense.
Okay, no notification.
Right. Now, Iran insists its nuclear program is peaceful, but the UN nuclear watchdog did pass a resolution accusing Iran of violating non-proliferation obligations. And intelligence assessments about Iran's capability have, shifted over time, adding some ambiguity.
But is ambiguity enough for imminence?
That's the problem. The actual criteria for defining an imminent threat are still really highly contested. The International Court of Justice, the ICJ, has never actually ruled definitively on whether anticipatory or preemptive strikes are legal.
So it's legally murky.
Very. Dr. Ranjan argues that for the U.S. claim of preemptive self-defense to be credible, they'd need clear evidence of both Iran's intent and capability to strike in the near future. That's a really high bar, especially since Iran doesn't actually possess a nuclear weapon yet, and diplomatic options were arguably still on the table.
What about collective self-defense? Could that apply? Maybe involving Israel?
That gets complicated, too. Israel's own strikes on Iran, often framed as preemptive, are legally questionable themselves, which then makes any claim based on collective self-defense with Israel also suspect. For Israel to legally link groups like Hamas or the Houthis to Iran as proxies justifying force against Iran itself, they'd have to meet the ICJ's effective control test.
Effective control.
Yeah, it's a very high legal standard. It means proving Iran was directly commanding and coordinating those groups' actions. Not easy to do.
So what are the broader implications here?
Well, we connect this to the bigger picture, allowing powerful states to just invoke preemptive self-defense based on, mere conjecture. It could seriously weaken the whole rules-based international order, which is already pretty fragile. Resisting the expansion of what counts as an imminent threat is crucial, especially since getting the UN Security Council to take punitive action against one of its permanent members with their veto power is always going to be unlikely.
A sobering thought about the state of international law. Okay, let's take our next deep dive way back in time.
All right.
To ancient Tamil Nadu. We're looking at Keeladi, a village in Sivaganga district that's become a really significant cultural site. The article is Excavating the Past, and it discusses findings that suggest, quite compellingly, an urban civilization there during the Sangam Age.
Yes, Keeladi's been generating a lot of excitement.
What did the dating reveal, and what was happening there?
Well, carbon dating of charcoal back in 2017 was a game changer. It pushed the settlement state back to the 6th century BCE. That significantly predates previous estimates for urbanism in Tamil Nadu.
6th century BCE,
Yeah.
wow.
And the excavations, the trenches, show remnants of things like furnaces, soot, ash. It confirms Keeladi was an industrial hub. They were manufacturing beads from quartz, carnelian, glass, agate.
An industrial center back then, and links to elsewhere.
That's another fascinating aspect. The findings suggest trade, maybe cultural exchange, with the Indus Valley civilization much further north and earlier. This has also, perhaps inevitably, fueled a political narrative.
How so?
Particularly for the ruling DMK party in Tamil Nadu. Chief Minister M.K. Stalin even announced a $1 million prize for anyone who can decipher the Indus Valley script. He noted that about 60% of the graffiti marks found on pottery in Tamil Nadu parallel symbols found on Indus seals.
Interesting connection, but you said inevitably. That sounds like it got controversial.
It did. The findings inevitably got drawn into the long-standing, often heated Aryan-Dravidian historical debate. Some expressed reservations about the interpretations linking Keeladi so strongly to a distinct Dravidian urbanism, potentially predating or paralleling northern developments.
And then things got complicated organizationally.
Yeah. Amarnath Ramakrishna, the ASI archaeologist who led the first two very productive excavation phases, was transferred to Assam in 2017. His successor reported finding no continuity in the brick structures Ramakrishna had noted.
That sounds disruptive.
It was. Excavations only really resumed properly after the Madras High Court intervened. Then, the Tamil Nadu State Department of Archaeology took over and strongly asserted that Keeladi was an urban civilization. But that claim itself remains contentious among some archaeologists.
So what's the core of that archaeological debate? What makes something urban?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? What constitutes an urban settlement? Those who dispute Keeladi's urban status often point to places like Harappa and Mohenjo-daro in the Indus Valley. They say those are clear examples, large-scale, planned cities, monumental architecture.
Right.
And they contend Keeladi, so far, lacks sufficient evidence on that scale. Then there was more controversy when Ramakrishna's big 982-page report on his findings was apparently returned by the Central ASI, asking for more evidence and some rewriting.
Oof, how is that perceived?
In Tamil Nadu, by some, it was seen as reflecting a bias within the BJP-led central government against discoveries from the South, especially anything seen as potentially challenging or being projected as superior to the sort of mainstream Indo-Aryan historical narrative. Ramakrishna has also consistently said they found no evidence of religious worship at the site, which adds another layer.
So, lots of debate, lots of politics. What's the bottom line?
I think if we connect this to the bigger picture, regardless of all the political disputes and interpretations, what seems absolutely undisputed is the need for much more extensive excavation. Not just at Keeladi itself, but in the whole surrounding Madurai and Vaigai River region.
On the scale of Harappa.
Exactly. To really substantiate the claim of a major, flourishing urban civilization there, you need that kind of large-scale, systematic work. And the responsibility for that really lies with the Archaeological Survey of India, hopefully with strong support from the Tamil Nadu government.
A huge task ahead, but potentially hugely rewarding. Okay, for our final deep dive, let's switch to the world of art.
Ah, Caravaggio.
Indeed. One of history's most compelling and maybe notorious figures. The source is titled Chasing Caravaggio, From Rome to Bengaluru. And it asks that age-old question, can you or should you separate the art from the artist? Especially when the artist is described as a lover, murderer, artist.
A potent combination.
Tell us about the painting mentioned, the one in Bengaluru.
Right. The article highlights Caravaggio's Mary Magdalene in ecstasy. And incredibly, this is the painting he was supposedly carrying with him when he was on the run, fleeing to Naples after he killed a man over a dispute at a tennis court in Rome back in the 17th century.
Killed a man over tennis. Wow. And the painting itself.
It's said to be painted from his memory of a love affair, possibly with a prostitute named Lena. It shows her in religious ecstasy, responding to the resurrected Christ, but maybe also hinting at Caravaggio's own sense of loss and turmoil. Very. And what's fascinating about Caravaggio, born Michelangelo Merisi, is how he fused that raw personal experience with universal themes. He really pointed the way for so much art that followed. But, almost everything we know about his life comes from police reports and court records.
Not exactly diaries or letters.
No. The French writer Stendhal just flat out called him a wicked man. And there's so much uncertainty. He died young, at 39. Was it murder? Malaria? Syphilis? Lead poisoning from his paints? We don't know for sure. Even the number of paintings he actually created is debated: 70, 89, 106.
Despite all that uncertainty and, well, wickedness, his impact was huge, wasn't it? The article calls him the first modern painter.
Absolutely. He was born around the same time as Marlowe, Shakespeare, Galileo, that incredible period. And yes, he's widely considered the first truly modern painter. Martin Scorsese, the filmmaker, has explicitly acknowledged his debt to Caravaggio.
So how did he achieve that modernity? What was so different?
It was partly his whole approach, which feels incredibly cinematic now. He chose to paint a moment not at the quiet beginning or the neat end of an action, but right during the action, in the middle of it all.
Like a film still.
Exactly like modern film staging. It makes you feel like you just walked into the room right into the middle of something happening. Think about his supper at Emmaus.
Okay.
It captures that absolute split second when the disciples suddenly realize this stranger they've been eating with is actually Christ. One disciple's arms are flung wide in shock, the other is halfway out of his chair. The perspective feels like a photograph, centuries before photography.
Incredible.
Yeah.
And he did this without formal training.
That's another remarkable thing. No formal teaching, no conventional studio. Apparently he never even drew preliminary sketches. No workshop full of pupils copying him. He was utterly unique, yet he influenced practically every artist who came after him. His canvases just hit you with this raw energy, power, and passion.
Which brings us back to that conundrum.
Exactly, the Caravaggio conundrum. How do you weigh the sheer artistic accomplishment against the documented personal wickedness? It's a question that, frankly, still haunts us today. We grapple with it regarding figures like, say, Roman Polanski or Woody Allen, and in all the debates around cancel culture.
It's not an easy balance.
Not at all. As the poet W.B. Yeats wrote, the intellect of man is forced to choose perfection of the life or of the work. Ultimately, I suppose, it's a choice each of us has to make for ourselves when we engage with art. Where do we draw the line, or do we draw one at all? It really makes you think about what we value more, the creator or the creation.
A perfect place to pause and reflect. Thank you for listening. If today's episode gave you something useful, consider following us on Spotify so you are the first to hear the next one.
You can give suggestions by contacting on Twitter handle given in the episode description.
We are always eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.